Mm. Creatives, community, kind folks, hello. Welcome to RPG with DBJ. I am your host, DBJ, and today is Third Pillar Thursday. This week's theme, topic, whatever, is like nuance, details, subtlety, the small things that help us in our tabletop RPG content and creating it. Now, of course, Third Pillar Thursday relates to the exploration pillar of role-playing games, with combat and social interaction being the first and second pillar. But yesterday I cut it a little short, had to put out a brush fire. So we're going to continue off of yesterday and then flow. It might go a little bit longer today, hour 15, hour 20 or so. And go into our usual third pillar, which is kind of my specialty, my passion. So yesterday, World Building Wednesday, we talked about you guys brought up the topic of fashion and slang, curse words and metaphors and food and the act of eating that food and where it comes from and such. And so we were just talking about like the little things that bring your world to life. So I thought we would and of course this always blends into the exploration pillar about the environment that in which your world takes place, Dungeons and Dragons or any other kind of role-playing game. So I thought we'd talk that out. Dead Man says, just check out a 1E or 2E Advanced Dungeons and Dragons adventure. A lot of those had were written in, if you went past the box text, which is a thing, it's the box text in the adventures was something that you would read to your players. If you went past that quite a bit, because those first and second edition Dungeons and Dragons didn't have things like skill systems, it wasn't robust enough to have like feats and skill systems and rules for everything. What was necessary was to give the players and the dungeon master enough details about where you were located or what you were encountering, whether it was a creature or a deep cavern or what have you, to give you enough information so that you would explore. And a lot of it was just a matter of role playing out what you were doing. Oh, are you checking under the bed? Are you listening for sounds? Do you smell something in the air? And it would give you subtle notes. Like, for example, you might find piles of rusted metal shards, and that would lead you to find out that this cavern was the haven to rust monsters or something. Or you might find scuff marks on the ground, and it would lead to a secret or a concealed door that will lead deeper into the dungeon. And so having those details and offering out those details is a must. Now, I will say one of the problems sometimes that we've run into when it comes to small details is that we as creators will back ourselves into a corner, or maybe you might be you might have an epidemic of the growth of well actuallys at your table, and the well actuallys will back you into a corner. And what you really want to do to avoid that is to just embrace it. Don't fight against it. Move with the flow of traffic. Don't try to swim upstream. We don't have to be salmon to do that. What do I mean by backing ourselves into a corner? Well, sometimes you might offer a small detail that will grow beyond the scope of which you intended the detail to you intended to give the detail. An example would be like you're describing a desert region, but part of this desert region has in the distance has major growth or what have you. And maybe you're just trying to describe what an oasis looks like. And this is off the top of your head. You didn't do any, you didn't intend on going into Google or stop the game to just flip through some nature books. And so maybe you describe this oasis as having like maple trees or oak trees or what have you. And someone at the table tells you, well, those trees don't grow in desert regions. They only grow in mountainous regions or something. And mind you, again, top of my head, because I'm probably wrong, right? And that's the whole point. You may give a detail that, when presented at face value, just seems wrong. You're in a desert. There's plant life. That plant life should not grow there, and that wouldn't matter if, and only if, you backed yourself into a corner in which your world is completely based upon, well, reality. Okay. A lot of times, this also, what you can, the details that you give that can back yourself into a corner also apply in two other ways. Historical gaming, if you intend on doing something that is highly historical, roaring 20s in the States, or the War of 1812, or you're doing the age of piracy, or you want to reenact historical battles from anywhere around the world. It's going to be you against, well, a larger number of you, right? It's you and yourself and your research against maybe 3, 4, 5 other players. And there's no way one individual can keep up with 5 other people, and the information that they have. And so your well actuallys are going to go, well, actually, and start throwing details at you, and statistics and things like that. And what you don't want to do is dig your heels in and be defensive. You don't want that conflict, that battle. First of all, session 0, right? You want to do a session 0, because whether you're playing Forgotten Realms, or you're playing in Middle Earth and Lord of the Rings, or Star Trek, or Star Wars, or any other setting that has a huge list of background and details and important figures and locations, you want to express to the people that are playing, hey, listen, this is how much knowledge I have. This is where it's taking place. From this point on, this is my world, and the details changing in it are my details to change as I see fit. Does Luke Skywalker kill Darth Vader? That's up to you. And if you're the dungeon master and you say, well, Darth Vader dies at a different location, or the player characters can't kill Darth Vader, or whatever, you establish that up front. Does Tatooine have multiple moons? That's up to you, or suns, or whatever. That's up to you, right? And you're going to get those individuals that are going to point out those details. But session 0, you need to say, okay, listen, I know you want to be a player in this game, and I know you know Middle Earth better than anyone else, but please don't stop the action to give a dissertation about, have the well actually stop the game to give the dissertation of, how much knowledge they know and what things should or shouldn't be there, because you're here to play a game. If you're doing this outside of the game, you guys are talking and eating pizza, or you're emailing each other, or you're using your social media and you're going back and forth about your character creations and backstories and rumors and stuff, that's a perfectly good time to hash those things out. But at the table while you're rolling dice, don't ever do that. So what you want to, an appropriate answer to someone who points out that a detail is kind of wrong. So let's go back to the oasis, and someone's like, well, those trees only grow in cold and mountainous areas. They wouldn't normally be in a desert. An appropriate response would be, you know what, you're right. And then just leave it at that, right? If you throw in a troll in that desert oasis, and they go, well, actually in the book, trolls are only really seen in swamps and jungles, then you go, you know what, you're right. And then and leave it open. Let your players speculate, because the reason why you don't really want arguments like that is because you want to leave the door open for more creative expression. For example, you want your players maybe you weren't expecting it, but you want your players to ruminate about this detail that's like a big question mark in their head. Well, why does this exist? Why are they here? Why? How is it possible? When did these people have the chance to do this other thing? And in your mind, instead of just arguing it, now your mind it allows your mind to grow, and you go, oh, you know what? This is a little bit of a mystery. I wonder why these mountainous trees would grow in the desert, as opposed to trying to retcon it and that kind of thing. So yeah, that initially, when you, and this happens to everyone, find your favorite intellectual property, and some writer or some creator or some set designer or someone working in fashion, costume design is going to throw something into your favorite TV show or movie, or a writer's going to throw it in a comic book, and you'll be scratching your head like, wait a minute, didn't 8 issues ago so and so's costume have this buckle on it, and why did it disappear? I mean, you're going to have those kind of things. It's the infamous the infamous herbal tea cup left in the background of well, not even the background, in the foreground of a Game of Thrones, right? It's sometimes there are details that it's not much more than a struggable thing. And some players will latch onto it incredibly hard. I mean, they'll latch onto it with tooth and nail and like not let it go. And yeah, those individuals, you might want to give them a little bit of the well, actually, um, pat on the back, like, okay, relax, take it easy. Maybe I misspoke. Maybe I misdescribed. And if to give a well, actually, it wasn't Starbucks. I believe it was a local herbal tea place or something like that. But that cup was with the brown wrapper around it, and the white top is like a universal thing. So yeah, everyone was like, "Oh, Westeros has Starbucks." Yeah, and that was a big thing. Which kind of sucks for the herbal tea place, which is like, "Hey, I'm a little hole in the wall. Why didn't everybody mention our name?" But I mean, that was just the easiest thing to latch onto because people saw it, and that happens. There are like websites dedicated to those mistakes when we film shows and things like that. The further away we get from modern day, the harder it is to for the set designers to remove every single element out of the scene. Whether it's like someone has to remember that there's I don't know, a truck in the background, or airplanes fly overhead, or you've got electrical towers. Sometimes there's school buses in the background, and it's all kinds of things like that. Yeah, so sometimes we do that on our own in our own role-playing games where we insert like phrases or things that are out of place or out of time in our game. And sometimes a lot of times just by accident. Other times it's just lack of knowledge. I am not a historian, so if I insert a weapon that was only created back in, it wasn't created until 1936, and the game takes place in 1867, usually it's just an accident, right? And some players they get off on that. It's like they get some like a personal like enjoyment. They get they get a little bit moist when they can point those things out. And if you have a player at your table that loves pointing out mistakes of that nature, I would just hand it, if it gets to the point where it's annoying and they're being rude about it. I would just hand over the DM. I'd hand over the books. I'd make my own character. I would give it to them and ask them to because they're perfect. Here, you do it. If they don't want to do it, then fold your books up and leave. It's just like, okay, well, I guess this isn't the game for you. And since you're not being, if you're not going to be polite or understand that you're being rude, then I would just leave. I mean, you don't have to sit there and take that kind of stuff. And sometimes some people do that by accident, right? Or in their real life, they're unable to do that. Many of us have jobs where the best and brightest aren't necessarily the ones. It's not necessarily a meritocracy. Sometimes it's a little bit of putting dangerous people in the place that can do the most minimal amount of damage. And many times they become your bosses, and you have to sit back and you just take it. And so we get to the game, they're just like, yeah, I get to express myself and correct the mistakes and stuff. So that can happen too. So talking about getting back to details and nuance and such. When yesterday we were talking about world building in terms of creating like using language and food and fashion and even how things are performed, how people greet each other. Do they shake hands or a bow, or do they use a left hand, right hand? Are there certain colors people wear? Certain types of phrases may come from things in and around the world. So they could make phrases of, like a curse, talking about people from another country or city or faction. Of course, there's always separations when it comes to wealth and status. So how people are dressed, how much money they have has a big thing to do with the details. Of course, religion, faith, again, has a lot to do with that, how it is expressed and those details. So writing down bullet points for your world as opposed to writing out like 8 pages like a dissertation, I think would do you best, and then let the players fill in the blanks through their discovery. Undo says, my biggest pet peeve, I had talked to someone, explicitly told them my setting was off canon, and he still got mad about it. Worst of all, he was not even playing. Yeah, yeah, well actually pounced on you, dude. And that's going to happen. That happens more often than a little bit, which is why so many, it's like a weird, it's the unspoken trap that a lot of us fall into, because like myself, I'm an old head, right? I'm an old grognard, and I know to avoid those things. So I don't run games where there's heavy canon, and I don't run heavy historical games at all. Is it because of most of it is because of a lack of wanting to put the energy into it to have to defend myself against the well actuallys, which is a problem, right? Would there be far more historical role-playing games and people running them? Would there be far more games run within certain types of canon? Of course. But on the other hand, there's a lot of newbies that are like, oh, I just saw, whatever the latest thing is, right? Like, oh, I just came out of Godzilla and I really want to run a kaiju, Jaeger versus kaiju game or something, right? It's whatever's popular. Star Wars is going to come up in December, and people, oh, I want to play another Star Wars game. Let's do this. And then you're all, Middle Earth, I believe it's Amazon, could be Netflix, whatever, it doesn't matter. Paid like $1 billion for the rights for the Tolkien's Middle Earth, and they're going to do a television series broadcast based in Middle Earth, and that's going to have a lot of problems too, because there's going to be a lot of actually, Star Trek has that issue. There's so many people that know so much that, like Undo said, is a pet peeve where someone who's not even playing the game and specifically was told explicitly that this is not true to the canon of what you saw, that they still complain. And the silly thing about people that complain about canon is the creators themselves will actually make their own, they will retcon their own creations by inserting things into their world. For example, let's go with Star Wars, right? George Lucas was approached by Samuel L. Jackson, who's like, hey, I love Star Wars. I'd love to be in it. And George is like, sure, I'll make you a character in this world. What do you want? And he's like, well, I want to be different. I want a purple lightsaber. And George Lucas didn't open up a reams of canon. He just said, you're Samuel L. Jackson. You're the baddest MF out there, so I'll give you a purple lightsaber. I'm pretty sure he didn't give much thought as to how that fit into the canon of Star Wars, especially with Samuel L. Jackson being kind of an aggressive Jedi that like kind of didn't fit. But now that he exists, now he's part of the canon. So, there are some people who just, some of these decisions are based on money. Some of them are creative decisions are based on favors. Others are based on what's the most expedient thing we can do in this television series or book or novels or something. Even George R. R. Martin with his, you know, Song of Ice and Fire series has even said that there have been other people who've gone back in his own books to tell him about corrections about people's ages or times or locations. And he himself has admitted that there are people that shouldn't be where they should be because he's built so much information that he's had to go back and rewrite it. Now, of course, he's a writer. When you're playing a role-playing game, you don't have time to do that. And so there will be people who are the ones that want to point out all the mistakes, and they know better than everyone else, and there's always going to be someone who knows just a little bit more than you do. So Undo, I absolutely positively agree with you that's, you know, you say that's my biggest pet peeve, that's mine too. I just, you know, those players that like to be backseat drivers are the ones that end up ruining their own experience by making it more difficult for people to give them the experience that they want. It's very easy to point out small details and complain about it, i.e. the coffee cup sitting in the foreground of a Game of Thrones episode. But the thing is that you have to understand, right? It's like, well, yeah, it's easy in hindsight to point out the mistakes until you have to do it, right? So those are things. And so again, a lot of times, yeah, don't butt your head up against it. My suggestion is just shrug your shoulders and go, that is strange. That sure doesn't fit. Okay. And let it dangle out there, right? Just leave it dangling out there and let that player's like, what? You know, or hand over the reins and go, you know what? This is like the 5th time you told me I did something wrong. You know what? You're absolutely right. Sometimes the biggest, the best punishment is to give people what they want. And just, oh, you know what? You're so right. Here's some of my notes. Here are my books. I'm going to make a character here. You run the game. I'm going to sit back here. You do it. Thanks. Now I get to play. if they balk at the idea, you know, then you know, just say, all right, well, which is it? Are you going to be rude and spend, for every 5 minutes of gameplay, you're spending 3 minutes explaining what's wrong, or are you going to run the game itself? Because one of those is got to change. I know we're role players, and a lot of us are we tend to be socially insular. We're not necessarily, tabletop role playing games aren't necessarily for the person who's expresses themselves openly and honestly all the time. When you get older, like myself, sometimes you really don't care. You just get to, you know, old people don't care, and because we realize that we don't have much time left. We're heading downhill, and you know, the subtlety and nuance, I guess, which is the subject of these talks, is like, that goes out the window, and eventually that's more of a social interaction thing of like, I really don't care that your feelings are hurt, considering that, you know, you spent the better part of my game hurting my feelings. Like, whatever. You can always block somebody online, and, you know, social media wise, if you're playing online games and stuff, you can block somebody in a minute. It's not going to hurt your feelings. Oh, it might hurt theirs, but whatever. You know. But again, I squirreled myself. Going back to details and nuance and such. I wanted to bring up the fact, before we get into like the third pillar part of the gaming, I did want to bring up the fact that one of the best ways to embrace your player characters into your world is to bring up the details about the player characters and how their details about their characters interact with your world. For example, the easiest thing, of course, we can come up with is a player character's race. I know that there are some players that really balk at the idea of playing like in Dungeons and Dragons, playing like a tiefling or a dragonborn or a drow that the public hates or is scared of or something fearful. It's a very common trope, just because of the background of those characters and their origins and such. But you can actually pull against that. Remind people that, yeah, your character with the I don't know, fiendish horns on their head, or the dragon scaled character, a lizard skinned character, or the character with the ebony skin and the bone white hair that comes from the underworld. People don't react to them quite the way you think they would in my world, or at least this particular region. Have them be fearful or stand in awe, or that kind of thing, and then play with those details, right? A small child goes up to the half orc and is like smiling and pulling on their coattails and whatnot, and wants to play with the big giant burly orc that's the barbarian with the big bloody axe, and maybe the child is kind of enamored with them, and maybe a parent runs by and snatches the child up, scared for the child's life, but the child is just like, hey, and wants to play with them, or whatever. I mean, pulling those details about what they look like and their appearance is one thing, and then of course how the players interact in your world are the things that they say rude in this culture. For example, there might be a gender division. You are unable to, you can never speak to a man unless you first approach the woman of the house first, or maybe there are certain types of hand and or body language that is performed before doing anything, such as bowing or shaking someone's hand, or forming some kind of symbol across the body, like or placing a hand on the forehead or over one eye before something. And that when you add in those details, when a stranger when the player characters who have no idea this is happening, you as the dungeon master can insert that. For example, when the player goes and reaches out their hand to shake the person's hand, maybe the person's kind of like looks at them quizzically, like, why'd you do that? And instead they take both their hands and maybe place them together or place them over one eye and then reach their hand out. And each time, after the third or fourth time that someone does that, the players might be thinking, should I start doing that? Or why is anyone doing that? And then when they ask that question, of course, going to the local tavern or blacksmith or what have you, maybe someone explains to them, like, we do this out of honor to the gods, or we've always done that. It's because, with one eye we should look out upon the world and the other eye is always covered in darkness or something. And of course, again, like Rickard said yesterday, you can drop little clues that leads the players to another form of adventure. Maybe the hand over the eye of darkness has to deal with yet another, deep dungeon dive and diving into a realm of darkness, and maybe that gives a clue. Maybe threw in a bunch of shadow monsters or something down in there. So anyway, the clues as to, if you want to go even deeper with the details of the player characters, it might be the colors they wear, the weapons they have, what type of character class is expressed outwardly from the players, spell books, the survival gear, a character wearing a noble emblem, going back to the original trinkets. When a player character rolled up their character, maybe there's some kind of trinket that dangles off of their clothing, or they wear a signet ring or something. You can always go back to what that means. Maybe the people recognize the noble seal that is emblazoned on a medallion on the character's chest or something. Especially when religious characters, the clerics and the druids and the warlocks in the game, maybe they wear something that's an emblem that relates to the greater power they serve, or greater power or powers they serve. And of course, there doesn't have to be instant hate or animosity, but there may be people who are, maybe there's a hidden faction and they're looking for someone to join them, or there's some kind of maybe someone starts to gain like a little bit of an entourage. They're looked at as a hero, or an oracle, or like a soothsayer or something, simply by their dress or the words they use. Now, going to Third Pillar Thursday, yeah, spent a half hour on that because basically dedicated to yesterday. The pillar of exploration, that is your world, that is the environment that your game takes place in. It's both the natural and man-made environment. So the natural environment, you can have lots of details in that, whether it's hot or cold, jungle, wetlands, rainforest, whether it's dry, deserts, barren landscapes, volcanic regions, aquatic regions, whether there's pools of water, lakes, rivers, oceans, salt water, fresh water, all that kind of stuff. The natural landscape itself can offer you lots of details. And the greatest part of that is you can always foreshadow something, hold it in your back pocket as a DM or a GM, and then pull it out later. For example, I live north of Kentucky and Tennessee, and there's a place called the Smoky Mountains. And they're called the Smoky Mountains because every morning, or most mornings, when you wake up, you look outside and it's completely blanketed in fog, right? The mountainous regions down in the valleys is just completely blanketed in fog. And so you as a game master can say, oh, when the players cross a certain mountainous ridge, or they go into the highlands or what have you, that when they wake up, there's a thin layer of fog on the ground. And there might not be any game related. There's none of it is gameable, right? You're just throwing in things. There's ash in the air as you get close to the 14 volcanic mountains of Volantis or something, right? There's smoke or ash or pollen in the air. There's a change in air pressure or temperature, hot to cold, cold to hot. Sprinkles of rain. You can always foreshadow those things. The scent of salt, sand in the shoes, whatever the case may be. And mind you, again, you're not gamifying it, right? You're not adding any penalties or bonuses. You're not applying disadvantage, or you're not applying difficult terrain yet. You're just putting that in your back pocket. And then later on, as your players go along, maybe there are forest fires, or torrential rain start to pour down, or there are it's tornado or hurricane season in this part of the world, or they see evidence of cracked earth, and then maybe there are volcanoes and things. So you can start to add those things in, and offering conflict, you're offering obstacles and hazards and challenges for your players to navigate through, so that when you did describe that there's going to be thick fog, and then eventually, maybe on the third day of adventure, the fog is so thick that the enemy is hiding in the fog, and it's very difficult to see much further than their own arm's length in front of their faces. Then you start to gamify it, and then you introduce those hazards to the players, those obstacles to the players. And so, the archer in the group, and the wizard who likes to fire their, blast their firebolt, far away at your enemies. And maybe now they have that disadvantage to hit them, or maybe not be able to see them at all beyond a certain range. That anything beyond a certain range, it's considered unseen, and therefore untargetable. Whatever the rules you have, which there are rules for that. And so maybe your more personable melee characters need to defend the group before the enemy comes out of the shadows. So this might be a possibility for your players to shine, to spread to shift the spotlight around. Maybe someone can cast a gust of wind and take the fog away as an example, and other things as well. Also, the small details can lead to adventurous and maybe even some comical or fun things for the players. I started writing the cinematic environs because and this was just a casual conversation I had online, talking about the fact of, like, can you drink, if you're in a frozen tundra and a player goes to reach in their backpack for their, the obligatory healing potion, does it freeze, right? Does it freeze solid? We don't often think about the items we carry with us when we go adventuring. Although when Dead Man brought up second edition AD&D, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, that was a thing, right? There were actual tables for hey, you fell down into a 10-foot pit. Okay, you're gonna have to roll to see if if the items that you had cracked, or you got hit with dragon breath, roll saving throws for your cloak and those boots and that shield and that backpack and the stuff in it. I mean, there are actual tables of saving throws, which technically they actually exist in 5th edition. We just don't tend to use them. But and a lot of players will balk at that idea as well. That's another session 0 thing you need to talk about. Whether if a player character suffers harm, for better or worse, is there harm done to their personal items? But anyway, that was a thing that brought, that came to mind. Like, if you have a healing potion and it's frozen solid, what happens? And does it freeze solid? If it does freeze solid, how do you unfreeze it? Is it useless after it freezes? Can you put it over a fire and drink it like a slushy, or an icy or something like, and being silly with it. But those are little details that you might want to include. I don't know. Will torrential rain soak your spell book? Probably not. I wouldn't. I wouldn't kick the legs out from under a player, but that's a possibility too. Going through swamps and such. Could you get a athlete's foot and foot rot and whatnot? Maybe going across salt flats. How caustic are the salt flats? All those kind of things. Sandstorms happening. Are you blinded? Is it too noisy to scream to your other party members if you're near a huge waterfall or a tornado or hurricane or whatnot? Pulling out that scroll to read off of that scroll you might not want to do that in 95-mile-an-hour winds, right? So those are little details. But then there's also man-made details. Blood on the ground, dirt in the corners. Does it smell like urine? Is it well tended? Snow and mud, covering the streets. People dropping flyers and trash. How are people dressed? Are they dressed for when the player characters arrive in town? Are they dressing for the coming winter? Is this place very warm? Are the people dressed in a manner that allows cool air to breathe through their fashion of their clothing because it's so the temperature is so hot or whatnot? And a lot of that, of course, again, you can Google foo some of those things, why people dress the way they do or act the way they do. Maybe there's periods of time in the world where people remain silent from high noon, for an hour or whatnot, or prayer time is a possibility in a religious setting. Maybe there's a magical region where people avoid. They can see runes on doors or walls or hallways or places in the city, and they know to avoid them. Or they touch the runes before walking through a doorway and speak certain words and go inside. And maybe the players have to uncover what language it is, and so that's another detail for them to uncover. And of course, uncovering the detail gives them a little bit more mystery. And you, as the dungeon master or creator, might throw in that little detail without. Like, let's say the city is run by a triumvirate of powerful wizards, and the players don't know that. They come into town and they see commoners just walking around the city and avoiding, runes, written stones in the ground or on the walls, or before they go into an important part of the city, they place their hand against a stone with a rune in it, and they mumble a few words below their kind of whispered a little bit, and the stone glows, and then if they walk through the doorway, you might not even understand why that even exists, right? Like you just said, it'd be cool if there's wizards that there are probably certain important areas for them to go through. And so you just, hey, Derek, what's going on? Yeah, it's been a little bit. It's perfectly fine, man. Me, ramble. So yeah, you could have a city filled with wizards. Maybe you throw some details in there. You're not even exactly sure why that even exists. And then when your players investigate it, maybe they latch on to that detail and like, ooh, maybe it's a protective spell, or maybe the wizards can track us if we walk into this important area or something. And of course, you as a game master, you're like, sure. And then you quickly scribble down or type into your OneNote or your Google Doc or something like, Yeah, that's right. The triumvirate of wizards can track you if you don't know the proper words. You know, so yeah, you may not even need to have the answer, but you can actually throw that little detail in there. Now, when it comes to um, going back to what Deadman said about first and second edition Dungeons and Dragons, up until till now, when it comes to role playing, when you give details for the players to like explore your world, you know, this is Third Pillar Thursday. So when they start exploring your world, uh, giving them those details and then letting your players exploit those details is part of the game. It's not a gotcha. It's not a, oh man, they got past my traps. It's the players immersing themselves in your world. So for example, let's take your classic